Welcome to Bentley House Kits. If you're watching this video, it's most likely you have purchased or are thinking about purchasing the Icebox kit with 3D printed hinges and interior shelves. In this video, I'm going to show you how to put it together. This is what you should receive when you order a kit. You will get a piece of sandpaper, an accessory bag. You will get 2 laser cut sheets that are cut out of mat board and 1 sheet that is cut from cardstock. Go ahead and put all that aside and take the largest piece of mat board. You're going to use a sharp craft knife to cut out piece I, and each time you remove a piece, take the cotton swab from your accessory bag and run it over the edge of each piece of mat board. While I do initially clean the mat board pieces in my studio once they come off the laser cutter, you may need additional cleaning once you receive the kit. You will also want to remove and clean pieces P, Q, and 3 of the pieces marked M. Leave the other 3 M pieces in the mat board sheet for now. You want to attach all of these M pieces to the lines you see on the P and Q pieces by adding a little bit of tacky glue to one side. You want to glue it just above the line. I know that's a bit confusing because I'm holding this piece upside down, but as the letter is upright, you want to add them just above the engraved line. You want to put it on the upper line of piece P and then both lines on piece Q. Leave the lower line on piece P blank. Piece P and piece Q will become the sides of your icebox, so you want to add glue to one of the sides and glue them to the face of piece I, making sure that is all the way lined up against the edge. Do that for both pieces, and this is how it should look. Now you want to remove pieces H and J. They are the exact same size, and they make up the top and bottom of the icebox. I'm using piece J to create the bottom piece of the icebox, making sure that it is in between pieces P and Q and it is lined up with the bottom edge of piece I, and I'm using piece H to create the top of the icebox. Now you should have a piece that looks like this. Remove both pieces marked K and 1 piece marked L to create the center part of the icebox. Start by gluing the K pieces back to back so you can still see the engraved markings. I am adding a heavy weight on top to make sure that it dries flat. Once that's dry, add piece L just above one of the lower lines on piece K. It doesn't matter which side because it's interchangeable. Let that dry. Make sure it is sitting at a 90-degree angle while it dries. Also remove the rest of the pieces marked M from the mat board sheet. On the remaining pieces, you want to add the M pieces just above the engraved lines as we did previously. Once you have this piece finished, it should look like this, and this will create the center mullion in your icebox. As you insert this piece, make sure that L lines up with the blank spot on piece P. That will show you where you need to glue the other side of piece L. I always like to make sure and dry fit so that I can tell where everything needs to be glued and make sure it all looks correct before officially gluing it in. Once you glue it in, you have all your spaces divided out for your icebox. This is a very convenient place to stop and paint the interior because once we add the next piece, it will be more difficult to reach inside. I'm doing a base coat of gray and then a top coat of silver, but of course you can paint it any way you like. Once that's dry, we can go ahead and add the faceplate. The faceplate is piece A, which actually holds B, C, and D within it. You want to make sure and keep those pieces, put them to the side for now. Add glue all around the front edge of your icebox, anywhere that the faceplate is going to touch, and then attach it, making sure that the sections line up and that the smallest opening lines up with the smallest section on the icebox. Now we're going to create the doors. Also remove pieces F, E, and G. Line them up like this. Piece C is going to be glued onto the back of F, piece B onto the back of F, and piece D onto the back of G. I'm making sure to glue them so that the engraved letters are hidden once it's glued together. I'm also adding a heavy weight to these so that they dry flat. When they're finished, you can go ahead and pop them into your icebox to make sure that they fit really well. If for any reason they do not fit, you can sand down the icebox door openings just slightly. Now we're going to add the feet to the bottom of the icebox. Each foot is made up of one piece marked N and one piece marked O. Just glue them so that the skinnier side is glued onto the face of the thicker side to create a 90-degree angle like so, and put them all together so you have 4 feet. Now I'm going to add glue to the upper part of the foot and glue it onto the bottom of my icebox. I am slightly insetting it, but you can glue the feet on however you like. I'm going to do this for all 4 feet and then let them dry completely before I move on, as they are a little bit delicate. You can also add a little bit of extra glue just behind the foot connection to add some more strength. This is also a great time to sand the edges if you want a little bit more of a rounded look. I'm also sanding the edges of the doors just to give them a rounder look as well. This is a great time to go ahead and paint the main body of your icebox and the doors. You can do this however you like, but I always suggest that you do not add any water to your acrylic paint, as any extra moisture could cause the mat board to bend. I also try to do an even coat on both sides as I'm applying the paint. This also helps the mat board from warping due to the moisture in the paint. I'm doing mine a flat black and then putting a slight sheen over it with a finish. And this is how it looks once it's done. I'm going to go ahead and take off the doors so I can work on the interior. Your kit is going to come with an accessory bag with 3D printed items. There are 3 racks that go on the inside. There are 2 hinge sets that mirror each other. And then there is 1 enclosure set that you will use at the very end. Go ahead and pull out the racks, and as you will see, these come straight off the 3D printer, and while I make sure that they are all printed so that they function and look good once they're finished, sometimes they have little imperfections and they're easily removed with your craft knife. Just cut through any of the little extra strings that you see and remove them from your printed items. You can do this for the racks and for the hinges. You can either decide to just allow your racks to sit on the interior or glue them in. You may want to wait till the end of the video to make your final decision. As I said, the hinge sets are mirrored. The reason for this is because one set is going to be correct for the left side and one set is going to be correct for the right side. The best way to figure out which is to lay them out, and so you know which part needs which hinges. The best way to know if it's laid out is that the arrow shape is on top. The arrow shape is the top of the hinge, and the flat piece is on the bottom of the hinge. I have the left side pieces laid out correctly, and now I'm cutting apart the right side pieces. You will have 2 extra hinges left over. That was just the easiest way to print them, so you can save them for a different project some other time. Or you can add an extra hinge to this door if you would like to. As you can see, I am now laying out the right side hinges, and they are a mirror image of the left side hinges. For some reason you can't get them to work, they may be the hinges that go on the other side of the door. To create the pins that go inside the hinges that allow them to move, we are going to be using the toothpicks that come in the accessory bag. Make sure you keep all the pieces of the toothpicks because we're going to use them again later. To start off, I cut off one of the tips of the edges of the toothpick and started sanding. I am sanding it down because I want it to fit perfectly inside my hinge. Now, because they're 3D printed, one of the sides might be a little bit more closed than the other. You can push the toothpick inside just to open it a little bit, but you will find success in slightly sanding down the toothpick a little bit until it fits perfectly and goes through the bottom of the flat piece of the hinge. So right now I'm pushing the bottom part of the hinge onto the toothpick until it goes up enough so that I can add the top piece of the hinge, or the arrow shaped piece of the hinge. Now I can add that on there, and I'm going to make sure that it rotates smoothly and I have a smooth rotating hinge. If there is any reason that they're not moving correctly, you can sand down the hinge pieces or the toothpick a little bit more. I marked with a pencil a line just underneath the bottom hinge so I knew where to cut the toothpick to create my hinge pin. And then I added some super glue and I'm pushing it into the bottom hinge for it to dry. Super glue is going to be your best bet to make sure that your hinge stays together and works well. But make sure you do not add the top part of the hinge back on until after the super glue has dried completely so that it doesn't glue together. Once you have put in all of the pin pieces, you want to go ahead and paint your hardware. I put mine on a little piece of masking tape so that they weren't moving all over the place, and I decided to paint mine silver just like the interior of my icebox. To attach the hinges, you're going to want to again use super glue. I find that this is the best way to keep the hinges on the box. I am adding the super glue first to the top piece or the arrow shape piece, and I'm making sure that no super glue at all gets on the bottom piece. And then I am pushing it onto my icebox, and so the glue should only be getting onto the door at this point. The reason I'm keeping the hinge together is so that I make sure it sits correctly as it dries. So I did this for all of my hinges. Once they're dry, I can push up the flat piece or the bottom piece of the hinge, add a little bit more super glue, making sure I don't get any on the top piece, and then rotate it back down until it touches the face of the icebox. Once that's completely dry, you will have 3 working doors. The doors are still removable, so you have easy access to work on the interior. Now we're going to work on the closures. You're going to be using your last 3D printed piece for these. Just remove it from the protective square and start cutting away at the little pieces that hold it into the square. You will have 3 closures in total once you're done, and they look like this. You can go ahead and paint them just like we did the icebox hinges. And you can also paint these pieces while they are still attached in the cardstock. Because I'm making everything silver, it's pretty easy to go ahead and paint them all at the same time. I am using, again, the toothpicks to create the closures. I'm using the pointed ends this time, and I'm making about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch cut on these. And then I am going to sand the cut end so that it's a little bit rounded. And I'm using a Sharpie to color it black, but of course you can use paint if you'd like to. Once these are done, you'll have 3 little stakes like these, and we can use these to join together the closures. You want to put it through the smaller part of the closure set first so that the spike is sticking out to one side. And then you can add the larger piece. As you will see, the smaller piece fits just in between the doors, so it could glue to the face of the icebox, and the larger piece will go onto the face of the door. You will see that as I lay these out, I end up turning the stake around so that it goes through the larger piece first and then through the smaller piece so that it doesn't block the doors. You want to glue the smaller piece of the closure first to the center area that's going down the middle of the icebox. Glue that with super glue, and then make sure to open your doors up just to make sure that no super glue got out and ends up gluing your doors shut. So I'd like to make sure that I let it dry completely without any risk of extra gluing. Next, I'm going to close them back up and grab each piece, and I like to make sure that I keep the stake in there, so I make sure I'm lining it all up so that once I put this stake in later, I know that it's going to fit correctly. And then I'm going to glue the larger piece to the face of the door, making sure that I'm not getting any on the stake itself so that it is not glued permanently inside of the closure. Finally, I can start adding the trim pieces to start finishing up the icebox. I'm cutting out the 2 longest pieces first, and I need to start folding them in half longwise. I found the easiest way to do this is with a pair of pliers to start bending them in the middle, slowly working my way down the length of the piece, and then eventually I can fold it in half, making a crease. Once that's done, I'm going to start gluing it onto the front edge of the icebox. One will go on the front edge and one will go on the back edge, and I'm just using tacky glue to attach these. Next, I'm going to follow the same exact steps for the shorter pieces in the cardstock sheet and add them to the shorter sides of the icebox. Now I'm grabbing the corner pieces. These also need to be folded in half, just like you see here, but you do not have to fold all the way to the very tip. Do this for all 4 pieces. And then we are going to attach them so that the middle piece is sticking out the front and the back of the icebox. I'm just attaching one edge on the top of the icebox to start out and let that dry. This is going to be the easiest way to do this. And then I'm adding glue underneath the unglued edge and also the very tip of the piece. And I'm going to finish by folding those down. One will go on the side and then one will cover the very corner of the icebox. When it's complete, it should look like this, and I'm going to do these same steps for all 4 corners of the top of the icebox, and this will be the result. You can also push some little indentions in if you want them to look like screws, but I just left mine plain. And now you have completed your icebox. You have these little stakes that you can pull out of the enclosures, open your door, and put some personalized miniatures inside. I almost forgot, there are some nameplate pieces in the cardstock piece, which you can add. It doesn't actually have a name, but they do add a little extra detail. In my original video on my main channel, I added an ice block to this top left corner, and while that's not included in the kit, I did want to insert that footage now in case you wanted to make your own. When researching ice boxes, guess what? They use real blocks of ice and they usually go in this large cavity up here. I thought it was in the bottom, but they actually go in the bigger spot, and the bottom is reserved for items that you want to keep really cold, like milk, dairy type stuff. So I thought it'd be really fun to make an ice block for this place. Like I said, you can use the 3rd rack or you can make an ice block. I'm going to be using Sculpey, polymer clay, amazing mold putty, UV resin, and some hot glue to make this ice block. I'm going to start off with some polymer clay that I'm going to hand shape into a rectangle type shape. Why can't I ever think of the 3D term? A rectangular prism. And I want to hand shape it. I don't want to cut it with a blade because I want it to look a little bit melty, and that means it's not going to have really crisp edges. Then I'm going to be using my 2-part mix mold putty, and I just mix this in equal parts until it is one solid color. By the way, I already baked the clay. Then I'm going to take my mold putty and I'm going to just form it around this rectangular prism to get the shape that I would like. The reason I'm doing this is so that I can pour my hot glue into a mold. And this is going to sit for about 20 minutes to cure, and then I should have a mold. And I'll just keep that polymer clay for something else. I'm sure I'll need a blue rectangular prism for something in the future. But for now, I'm going to be using this mold to create my ice block. I'm going to be using hot glue because as opposed to resin, it's fairly cheap, and a lot of the ice would not have been very clear because it was utilitarian ice. It was not ice that you would probably be drinking or putting in your food or your drinks, I'm guessing. So I'm not too worried about it being clear. I pumped it into the mold and I let it cool down for a good 10-15 minutes. And what we have here is a block of hot glue. Now it does kind of look frosted, so you could use it like this if you wanted to, but I want mine to look a little bit melty. And so I'm going to be using UV resin and putting it onto the surface of this to make it look like it is melting. And I'll show you the difference between these so you can decide whether you want to go the extra UV resin step. But it's pretty easy. You just go one side at a time and just put out a little bit of UV resin onto whichever side you're working on, and make sure you cover it as best as you can without it going over the side, otherwise it will drip onto your mat. And then you just hit it with the UV light and it will cure pretty quickly. So here you can see I've done a few sides with the UV resin versus just the plain hot glue. I ended up doing the whole thing with UV resin and putting it into my project. That's all I have for you today for the Icebox Kit instructions. If you want to purchase this kit, you can always go to the link to my store, which is in the description box below. And if you do complete this kit, make sure to tag me on Instagram with Bentley House Kits. I always love to see what you create. Bye!